thank you all for coming. It really is encouraging for us to see such a big turnout, and I know maybe some of you, your parents made you come, but in any event, thank you for being born to parents that forced you to do that. And what I'm supposed to talk to you today about is, as Doug said, the core of what economics teaches. And I was thinking about this, earlier the week, like, what am I going to talk about? And I kept saying, okay, this is what the core of economics is. And then say, well, wait a minute, but that overlooks something else. So my problem is I don't really know what the core is. So what I'm going to do is what students, when I was a professor, I noticed on the exam questions, students who really didn't know what the answer was, they would just list everything they knew about the subject and hope that something stuck. And I would say, yep, that's what I was looking for. So that's what I'm going to do here is I'm just going to run through and give you, it's not really a systematic thing, but just some of the main points, the greatest hits of economics, if you will, given the time constraints that I have. So I think one thing you can say is, why should you study economics? What's the big deal? Is that economists really, they have a way of looking at the world. There's things they know about how the world works that people who don't study economics or haven't studied economics, they wouldn't know. All right, so just to give you an analogy, I just make a confession. I don't understand how a toilet works. Like, really understand. I flush it and I see what happens. But I don't understand exactly how it works. I kind of picture there's elves inside, and when the handle moves, they pump the water out, and then they fill it up. But they're invisible elves because I've checked. They're not in. I can't see them. And you might be thinking, oh, come on, what are you talking? But really, but the toilet, if the water turns off, you can actually get it to flush once if you pour enough water in from another source, like into the bowl, it flushes. Okay, so if you're thinking the handle has a lever that opens up in a trap door and that's why the water, you're wrong. Okay, so I'm just saying I've had many theories, but the point is that I don't understand how a toilet works, and yet it's kind of an important thing, right? And it's good that some people know how that works, and yet we just take it for granted. All right, and so similarly, how does the economy work? There's things about the market economy that happen day in and day out that we just take for granted, and yet are not as important as a toilet, but they're pretty important. And just to sort of motivate this, let me just try to get you to see what I'm talking about here. You know how if you're going to go to see a movie, like you and a bunch of friends are going to go see a movie, and it's a real pain. Like, it can take a long time to decide, okay, well, what movies do you want to see? What have you seen? And just to get 5 people to go to a movie and everyone's happy and everyone's schedule works, that's kind of an undertaking, all right? Just to give you an example, I saw The Mummy 2 about 3 times in the theaters, and I didn't even like it the first time, right? And the only reason was just because it was such a hassle and the other people hadn't seen it yet, and I was thinking, but it's really not, and anyway, my point is just, it's very difficult to arrange something like that, and yet, how does an economy work? You go to the grocery stores, I buy yogurt for my son, and I go to the grocery store, and he likes this very particular yogurt. It's what is it? So it's organic and it's vanilla. And a lot of times when he asks for vanilla, he's young and people think he's slurring his speech or something. But no, it's because it's banana and vanilla blended into one, right? So it's got to be that. And also we like to get the big container because he goes through it like it's nothing. And so if you get the little ones, it's more expensive and you're going to the store every other day. So recently, for some reason, the store has just been out of it for like 4 days in a row. And I'm just outraged that the big container of the organic vanilla is out. I have to buy the little vanillas, and that's just such a hassle, right? And I just can't believe this outrage that the store, and I probably could go down the street, and the store down the street has it, but what a hassle is that, right? So if you see, just the things I'm taking for granted, just the very particular things that a market economy delivers every day, whereas in the Soviet Union, people literally would be in lines for bread. And I don't mean they wanted, whole wheat, 50% reduced fat bread that this particular company made, and they wanted to just walk down the street instead of going 2 streets down. No, just to get bread for the family, they had to wait in lines. All right, and it's not that Americans are so much smarter and better people and the Soviets were dumb and they didn't know about how to produce food. It was that the system that was in place in the Soviet Union was largely what's called a command and control economy, or socialism, whereas the United States, at least it used to be the case, the system we had here was free market capitalism, and that's less and less true every day, unfortunately. But that's what's happening. That's why we just take it for granted. Just like you flush the toilet and normally it works and you don't even think about it, whereas a plumber could really tell you what's going on, and there has to be people who know how that works. Same way in market economy, economists can tell you, at least if they're good economists, can tell you, why does that work? How is it the case that just think about all the people that are involved. When I go to this store, first of all, somebody must have arranged to ordered all that food that's on the shelf that's just sitting there waiting for me to look over and to say, what do I want to buy? And then I just assume when I go to the cash register that there's going to be someone there whose shift happens to, have them there right then to take my money and to ring it up and so forth. Okay, so that's why I brought up that movie example about when you're on your own trying to get even 5 people to go to see a movie somewhere. That's a huge undertaking, and yet if you think about the coordination that was necessary for the people who made the yogurt, the people who had to store it to make sure it didn't spoil, that it was constantly refrigerated, the guy who had to drive the truck, the people who had to load the truck in the warehouse to bring it to the store, the manager of the dairy department who had to order enough to make sure it didn't run out, that's all just automatic, so that when it's gone for 4 days, I'm just beside myself that this is an outrage. How could this happen? All right, so you see what I'm saying, that it's very complicated, and that yet the stuff just happens automatically. So that's partly what economics is about, is it studies how is it the case that this just sort of magically happens on its own. There's an economist in the 1800s that he was a French economist, and he said that it's a miracle that Paris gets fed. Right? That's the way he summarized this sort of wonder, that it's amazing that just all these things happen, that you don't see a bunch of Parisians just starving to death, whereas you do in communist countries. You did have mass starvation often, right? That happened in China, it happened in the Soviet Union, and part of it was, and the historians in the crowd can discuss this at greater length, but some of it you could say, well, it was because the people in charge were actually evil and trying to inflict that on their political opponents. But be that as it may, the point is, under communist countries, people literally, sometimes, in many cases, millions of people literally starve to death, whereas in capitalist countries, that doesn't happen at all. It's, you're outraged if you're out of vanilla in the big container for 4 days. All right, so that's part of what economists do, and they study that and they understand how does this system work, whereas the average person who doesn't really know much about economics just takes it for granted and just assumes, yeah, you go to the store and there's food there. So that shows you like the importance of studying economics. So one aspect, of course, is that it's important that you have, why is it important to have sound economics for people to understand it? It's because you need to have good economic advisors, right? That they advise the government, and to motivate that. George Carlin one time had a routine where he said, now folks, if you think about it, by the process of elimination, somewhere on the planet there has to be the worst doctor in the world. Just think about it. That person has to exist, and he's seeing a patient tomorrow, right? And you just, that gives you the willies. By the same token, somewhere on the world, there is the worst economist in the world, right? And he's seeing Obama tomorrow. So just think about that. Okay. I was hoping that one would work. All right. So I was guessing you guys weren't big Obama fans. Okay, so that's part of it, that you need to have the economists, you want to have good economics because the economists who advise the government. But actually if that's what our hope was in, or we're in, to use the subjective mood, that would be, there wouldn't be much hope there at all, because there's always economists who are willing to, I don't want to, ruin your day and shock you with these revelations, but there are some bad economists out there, and they're on the dark side, and they, whether they're just misguided or whether they know full well what they're saying is bad policy, but they, win the Nobel Prize, and I'm not naming any names, because of what they say, get New York Times columns, what have you, just throwing out random stuff. So there are people who are willing to, with PhDs, to get out there and trot out certain theories to justify whatever it is that the government wants to do anyway, to make, to give it this sort of veneer of intellectual respectability. So really, what the important thing to do, and this is partly what the Mises Institute is all about, is to educate the public, because the politicians can only get away with this stuff if the public is ignorant of basic economics. And it's not that you have to study, real arcane matters of capital theory or something, monetary velocity and things like that. No, you just have to know things like, gee, after the housing bubble pops and everybody from the president to the people at the Mises Institute agrees the problem was there was too much money and too many resources going into housing, that the solution to that is not to give more tax credits to home buyers and to pump more subsidies into Fannie and Freddie Mae, right? You see that doesn't make any sense, right? Whereas the politicians will say with a straight face, yeah, the problem was we had too much spending, Americans weren't saving enough, and that's why we want people to go max out their credit cards, which is what they're saying to people. It makes no sense, okay? So it's important in order for the public to understand when politicians are saying things that just make no sense at all, right? So that's part of the reason why everyone should have a basic understanding of economics. Whereas technically, it doesn't really matter if most people don't understand how toilets work, because if your toilet breaks, you can just call a plumber. You might have to pay more if you don't really know what you're doing, if it just was a quick fix and you have to have a plumber. But it's not that, whereas in economics, if the majority of the public doesn't understand how it works and they vote in politicians who enact horrible policies, even if I know full well it's not going to work, I can't get out of it. Whereas if your toilet doesn't work, it doesn't really bother me unless I go to your house for dinner or something, right? But you can kind of take care of your own thing, whereas with economics, if the public in general doesn't have good ideas and the policies are horrible, that brings us all down. So it's sort of like we're all in this together, and that's partly why it's important in economics as opposed to something like quantum physics or some real esoteric field. It doesn't really matter if the general public has no idea how that stuff works, because the experts can go ahead and make the advances, and then if technology is developed, people don't care what the theory was behind it, they just want the product. Whereas with economics, if there's bad theory running the decisions that are being made by the government, well then, we're all going to suffer. All right, so let me just go through a few other areas. So that was sort of the big picture, what's the importance of this. And now let me just give you some aspects of economics that are fairly typical and give you some examples. So one thing that economists do a lot is they will point out what's called unintended consequences of certain government policies. So economists, since they came into vogue, that's what they've been doing, and it used to be the case that economists were sort of a thorn in the side of the political authorities, because people in charge like to imagine that they're pretty powerful, and they think that, oh, gee, if there's a recession, well, it's just a matter of us doing the right policy, and that'll fix it like that. Or, if there's massive inflation, well, we just have to crack down on these gougers and these speculators, the people that are pushing up prices, and we'll fix it. So a lot of times the people in power overrate the things they're capable of achieving. And so historically, economists have often served the role of sort of being the annoying person in the corner saying, this isn't going to work, and let me tell you why, and you guys are crazy, right? So that's historically how it was. And like I say, in more recent decades, it's actually flipped a little bit, where now there's plenty of economists, unfortunately, who are saying that, this is why these government policies will work, and then when they don't work, they can explain, oh, well, what happened was, and they give you the explanations. But traditionally, economists often talk about unintended consequences. And so to give you some examples, seatbelt laws. Okay, so that seems like to a lot of people just an obvious thing that governments do, usually at the state level. They will pass laws saying, click it or ticket is a phrase that I think they used in New York State when I lived up there, saying, if we catch you without wearing a seatbelt, you'll get whatever it is, a $50 fine. All right, so in case you guys are younger, obviously, than we are, if you just take that for granted, that's just the way it is. It didn't used to always be like that. It used to be, you could decide on your own, do I want to wear a seatbelt or not? And some cars, believe it or not, used to not have seatbelts. It's crazy. And as you may be aware, America didn't just suddenly die in 1947, right? That people did survive without having seatbelts being mandatory for a while. So the question is, well, what's the trap? And usually the way the argument would work, like if you see people writing letters to the editor, it's, oh, well, I should have the right to be stupid if I want, and the government can't tell me what to do. And then other people would say, well, it's a matter of public safety, and yeah, it's a violation of your civil liberties for the government to force you to wear a seatbelt, but come on, that's just, common sense, right? So that's typically the way the arguments would work. Whereas economists, when they came on, into this issue, they would say things like this. They would say, well, wait a minute, there might be unintended consequences. It might not necessarily be the case that if the government all of a sudden starts fining people who don't wear seatbelts, and then presumably people start wearing their seatbelts more, that's going to just be an unambiguous improvement for social health or whatever, reduction in fatalities. And the reason, well, let me tell you what actually happened, and then see if any of you can guess what the reasoning was. So, like I said, the economist who came up with this theory, that I won't tell you what the theory was, but I'll just tell you the outcome. He went and measured this thing. So he would look at a state that passed the seatbelt law, and then compare, and then look at what happened to the fatalities in that state versus the adjacent states that, had the status quo. They didn't have a seatbelt law. And what he found was that the states that would institute the seatbelt law, the fatalities among drivers was about the same. Okay, so the number of drivers or the number of deaths per driver, whatever it was, would be about the same per year. But the number of accidents went up. And he also found, well, let me just stop there. Can anyone come up with why that would be the case? So again, to give the answer of what happened, the number of total accidents went up, but the number of deaths was about the same. Does that make sense to anybody, why that would be the case? Yeah. Right, exactly. So if you couldn't hear her, she said people felt safer when they were driving, so they drove more recklessly. Right, so that was the theory that, look, it's not just people drive a certain way, end of story, that actually there's all, you can drive a little bit faster, you can be, fiddling with the CD player. And a lot of times when people hear this, they think, oh, come on, you economists are crazy, you have your models, and that's not the real way people live. Well, no. You're driving, right, on the interstate, and you're changing the CD, and then you're looking through your, well, not you guys, because I know you're probably very conscientious drivers. You probably pull off the road when you want to change a CD. But imagine somebody who's changing CDs while they're driving, and they're going through the thing or wherever you have it. Or actually, what am I saying? You guys don't even have CDs, right? You just have it all on your iPod or something. Okay, well, there used to be these things called CDs. And you're changing that, right? And then, but all of a sudden, you're going to pass an 18-wheeler. Right? And maybe it's raining, it's drizzling. I know I do this. I stop and I put both hands up and I wait till I pass the 18 and then I go back, right? You see what I'm saying? So it's not that you just always drive the same, but depending on the circumstances, you alter your behavior a little bit. To give you another example, this isn't going to ring true for you guys, but your parents in the other room. The safest I have ever driven in my life was the day I drove my newborn son home from the hospital. Right? I was like this. I was, signaling with my hand. I was doing everything. I was driving like I had 20 pounds of nitroglycerin in the trunk, right? Because, there's a newborn baby in the car, okay? So it's not that the days when I didn't have him in the car, I was driving with a death wish, and I was just, with blindfolded or something. But the point is you do drive differently depending on the situation. And so other things equal, if somebody who before wouldn't have had a seatbelt on now, because they're afraid of getting a ticket, they're wearing a seatbelt, it's not, again, that they consciously think, well, I'm going to try to get killed or I'm going to try to get in an accident because I'll be safe. That's not what they do, but the point is they drive a little bit differently. Maybe not any individual person, someone, you might look at someone before and after the seatbelt law and he doesn't get in an accident, but when you have hundreds of thousands of people in a state driving many hours per day, the total number of accidents goes up. But yet, because more people now are wearing seatbelts, the fatalities, the two effects cancel out, in other words, basically. But where they did see an increase in fatalities was among pedestrians and bicyclists, right? Because they weren't helped by the drivers wearing seatbelts more frequently, but they were still getting hit by the people driving more recklessly. Okay, so in the states that passed these laws, they found the number of total deaths due to traffic accidents actually went up a little bit. Whereas that would have shocked most people. So not only was the government violating people's rights to drive however they wanted, but they were actually killing people. And the other perverse thing was, now the people who were dying really had nothing to do with it, whereas before, the people who were dying were the ones that weren't wearing seatbelts. Whereas now it was people who had the unfortunate, luck of riding your bike in front of a guy who's driving recklessly. Okay, so that's just one type of example to see the sort of things that economists would do. Another example comes with the Endangered Species Act. Okay, so there, the government says, oh, okay, there's certain, whatever it is, there's a certain slug, or there's the red, what is it called? The red, I don't even know how to pronounce it, cockaded woodpecker or something like that. And there's, all these things, spotted owl, these things that, you're out in the Midwest or something, you got a big property, and if this thing is on your property, you cannot build a swimming pool, you can't, maybe you're going to cut down the woods there behind your house and plant some corn or whatever you were going to do. But no, if that thing's on your property, the government comes in, the regulators come in, and you cannot develop that stuff because you might disturb their habitat, and it's an endangered species, it's protected, and so on. Okay, so again, the typical argument is you've got people on the one hand saying, oh, that's not right, that's my property, I bought it, or that's that person's property, the government has no business, putting animals ahead of the rights of the people, that's not fair. And then on the other hand, you got people saying, no, this is really important for the ecosystem, or, there's lots of medical cures that might come from, having these animals and preserving them. There's all sorts of untold benefits, and, just our job as stewards of nature is to preserve this. And that's kind of where the arguments, butted heads. But then economists would come in and they say, wait a minute, let's look at the incentives. And is it true that passing these sort of laws actually protects these species? And what would happen in practice was something called the 3 S's. Does anybody know what that was? Okay, the 3 S's in this context were, make sure I get it right, shoot, shovel, and shut up. Okay? So what that means is you're a landowner and you have big plans and you're going to, the backhoe loaders are coming tomorrow, you've spent thousands of dollars and you're going to clear out your land and, build a shopping mall or whoever knows what you're going to do. And you go out there and you see that there's a spotted owl in a tree. So what are you going to do? You're going to go call the government, say, come on in? No, you look around, you shoot the spotted owl, you dig a hole, you put this thing, you go, and you never talk of that again. You never mention that you ever saw a spotted owl on your land. Right? So the point is that you can see, so it's not merely an issue of, gee, is it, does the government have a right to tell me what to do with my property, but that if your goal is to protect the spotted owl, it's not necessarily the case that passing these laws is the right way to do it. All right, so that's just to give you some examples. Let's see. Another thing economists talk about is what's called opportunity cost. And so here, the definition of that, what opportunity cost means, I'll tell you the definition. It's not really going to mean anything to you until I illustrate it. But the idea of what an opportunity cost means is it's technically the value of the next best thing that you're not able to do because of a decision you made. All right, so it's not necessarily a cost that you're paying money out of pocket for something, but it means an opportunity that you're forfeiting because you're deciding to do something a certain way. All right, and so economists say that that's part of what influences behavior. It's not just how much you're paying out of pocket, it's the opportunity cost. Sometimes if you're missing out on an opportunity, that's a real cost, and that influences behavior. So let me give you one example of that is I was in grad school, and the UAW, United Auto Workers, came in to unionize the economics graduate students, or actually the graduate students at all of NYU, New York University. And now if you're going to ask me what the heck did the United Auto Workers have to do with unionizing the graduate workers, to this day I don't know. I was actually briefly a member of the UAW because they came in and they voted, and I had no choice to be a member of the union. But they came in, so we were being exploited. We had to grade exams, and your hand gets cramped. There's all sorts of horrible things that happen as a grad student. And so anyway, they came in to unionize us, and the administration of NYU obviously didn't want some huge union, in between them and the grad students. Because when you go to grad school, I realize some of you might not get the context, you actually get paid, right? That you go to in most places, if you're getting a PhD at least. So I would get a small stipend, and I would study, and then I would have to grade exams for a professor or something, or sometimes you'd have to teach classes in the summer. And that was the deal. They would pay you because they knew, you're already in debt from your undergrad, that it's, they have to give you incentive to try to go and get your PhD. So technically, you were an employee of NYU, right? Because they were paying you for services, and then part of the compensation package was if you passed your test, you got a PhD. So it wasn't a bad job. So anyway, the UAW wants to unionize us as a collective bargaining unit and so forth. And the administration didn't want that to go through, obviously. And so the provost of the school is going around meeting with the different departments to say, why are you guys so unhappy? Why do you want to bring in the union? What's going on? You don't like this arrangement? We're basically paying you to get a PhD. Is that really so awful? And so they were asking what he wants to do to make things better. And so one guy, and this was someone getting a PhD from NYU, which is a fairly highly ranked school, an economics degree, so you would think, this guy would be a really sharp economist. And he said, well, what we want is we want to get subsidies for housing, right? Because what would happen is we would just get a check every month from what our stipend was, and then you live wherever you want. And so this guy was saying, instead of that, we want to get a break on NYU housing if we choose to live at NYU. And so the provost said, okay, we can do that, but you understand that the monthly check you get will have to be lower, right? Because there's a certain pile of money that we give you every month, and you spend it however you want. If you live at NYU housing and you want us to lower your monthly rent, we can do that. But then we're gonna have to give you a smaller paycheck for what you spend on others. Do you want us to do that? And the kid said, no, it doesn't cost you anything because you own those buildings, right? So if you just think through that, and again, this is a kid that's getting a PhD in economics from NYU. And the provost, I'm sure he was horrified because then he had to go talk to the drama students, and this is what he's getting from the economists. So I'm sure they're going to say, we want perpetual motion machines, and... Okay, so just in case I lost some of you, I know if you don't get the joke and people are laughing, you kind of laugh because you don't want to look dumb. The reason that's a mistake is NYU owns those buildings, and they could rent them out to anybody and earn whatever the market rent is. Let's say it's $1,000 a month. Right? And so if they're charging NYU students $1,000 a month, and then all of a sudden they say, oh, well, let's knock it down to $800. Well, yeah, they're still getting money from that. It's not that NYU has to pay someone $200, but that's $200 less they're getting because of that policy, right? So that's in a sense, they're that much poorer. And so, yeah, that does cost NYU $200 a month, that subsidy, in a very real sense of the term. And that's what the provost was referring to. And this guy who was getting a PhD, just, he didn't even get that issue. He thought, no, if you own a building, you can rent it out for free. It doesn't cost you anything. Okay, let's see. How much, does anyone know how much time we have here?
About 8 minutes.
Okay, let's see, I'll do one other opportunity cost one, or it's not really opportunity cost, but a similar thing. I had a friend, we were going to some event, and we parked in a parking garage, and we're walking out, and he says something like, when I get a little older, I'm going to go into parking garages, because that's just the easiest business there is, right? You don't have to do anything, you don't have any costs, you just sit there, people just give you money as time passes. And so I think I probably did try to explain something to him, and he probably got annoyed. But if you think about it, if that were true, then the world should be covered in parking garages, right? If it really is just free money that comes in, the guy who owns the parking garage is kind of stupid for not making 50 of them, right? And so there, again, is an issue of opportunity cost. That you don't have to buy a bunch of materials and whatever once the thing's up and running. But a big thing is that land, right? You have to pay rent on the land if you don't own it. And if you own the land, because where he was coming from is he was thinking, okay, sure, you got to pay people and build the thing, and you have to buy the land. But after that, your only expenses are, how much does it cost to keep that gate running and the ticket thing running, and maybe some electricity for lights, but it's really not that big a deal. And the point is, though, that no, even beyond those things, though, the fact is if it's in a downtown area that's very busy, that land is very valuable, right? So the owner could sell off that land and get whatever it's worth, $1 million, and then have $1 million to go do something else with. He could go invest it in the stock market, or invest it in mutual fund or something. Okay, so the idea is even though you're not technically losing money out of pocket, even if your expenses were zero, if nobody was going to your parking garage, or only a few cars per day were going to it, and you were in the downtown Manhattan, it would be crazy if you were the owner of that place to keep your capital locked up in a parking garage, right? You'd be better off selling it to someone else for whatever that land is worth, $1 million, and then investing it somewhere else. And you would earn a higher income that way. So the way that's an issue of opportunity cost is by deciding to keep your property as a parking garage, you're forfeiting the opportunity of selling it and then investing the proceeds elsewhere. Okay, so that's the relation there. Okay, in the remaining time, I've got a few minutes left, let me just talk about the last thing here is that what economists do, one of the most important things they do is they talk about, it's called pricing theory, right? So where do market prices come from? How does a market price originate? And why are prices one number when they could be something else, right? And so here, I'm obviously, in 5 minutes, I'm not going to give you the whole story, but let me just get you to see how to think about the problem. So one idea people have, and this goes back to Aristotle, I think even, is that people are thinking there's some objective fact about how valuable a good is, right? And so that, there's if I'm selling you something, to be fair, we have to say, well, how much is the thing worth? Because if it's worth $10 and I charge you $11, then I'm ripping you off. But then also, on the other hand, if it's really worth $10 and you drive a hard bargain and only pay me $9, then you're kind of ripping me off, right? So, but if we charge $10, then it's a fair price. That's an idea a lot of people have. But if you think about it, that doesn't make too much sense, because that means, there's no point ever in trading, for one thing, right? If the thing's really worth $10, chances are one of us is going to be getting exploited, right? Just randomly, if the price is just a penny one way or the other, one of us is getting ripped off. And then even if it does happen to be the case that we charge exactly what the thing's worth, well, what's the point, right? That I give you a $10 bill that's worth $10, and you give me an item that's worth $10, and we're both, we just swap something of equal value. What's the point? All right, so that, you see there's a problem there. Let me come at it from a different angle. You go into a grocery store and you're shopping, and someone sees something that's on sale. There's hot dogs are 50 cents or something for the package of hot dogs. Whoa, that's a great deal. And they start putting hot dogs in the cart. Well, why do they ever stop? You think about it, right? I mean, if the hot dog, if the thing is worth more than the price, you should just keep loading your cart up until it overflows or until you run out of money, right? If this thing is worth more than the price these idiots are charging, I'm just going to get as much as possible, right? If somebody had a $10 bill and said, hey, I'll charge you $8 for this, I would buy as many of those things as I possibly could, right? If you think about it, someone's charging you $8 for a $10 bill, right? Okay. I think some of you are like, wait a minute, I'm not sure. Afterward, let's go and we'll play card games and you can't lose. It's really. All right, so you see what I'm saying? So you think about that's odd. Now, it's true, the better the deal is, a lot of times people will put more and more into their cart, but at some point they stop. All right, so again, I'm just trying to motivate and to get you to see it's not the case that in a market economy, the price is a reflection of how much the thing is objectively worth, and then you buy it if you think that it's actually worth more than the price, or you don't buy it if, oh no, that thing's not worth that, right? That can't be the case, or that's not the whole story at least, because then why do people buy a certain quantity and then they stop? So part of the answer is that people decide things what's called on the margin, all right? So it's not an issue of in the abstract, do you think a package of hot dogs is worth 50 cents or more or less? It's rather, it matters, well, how many am I starting out with, right? So you're pushing the cart. It might be that the first package of hot dogs is to you, much more valuable than the 50 cents you have to give up when you go to the register, and maybe the second one is, but as you're getting more, your supply of packages of hot dogs is going up, so an additional unit isn't as important to you, and the more you're planning on buying mentally, that's, your stockpile of cash is going down, and so a further 50-cent expenditure becomes more and more onerous, if you will, right? The remaining dollars you have become more and more important as that happens. So you keep buying, or keep putting them in your cart until the point at which, no, I'm not going to get one more because that one, which is the 8th package of hot dogs, actually to me is not more valuable than the remaining 50 cents that I have. Okay, so that's one way of looking at it. Another implication, another thing of thinking is if it really were the case that goods had objective value and it was just a matter of people went out looking for people who were charging the wrong price and were fools, well, it's kind of weird then that people coming out of a grocery store all come out with different carts, right? Wouldn't you kind of expect that over time people would learn, what the good deals were, and that if you just stood at the exit of a grocery store and saw people leaving, why do they all have such different carts? Stuff, different things in their carts. That's kind of odd. If is it just that at best one person saw the really good deals and everyone else made a mistake? And you realize, well, no. And so the solution to all this is that in terms of economics, value is subjective. All right. Now, a lot of times people misinterpret what they mean. They think that we're saying, engaging in moral relativism or something. No, we're not saying that. But what we mean is, as economists, to explain people's behavior in a market, you start from the fact that people's tastes are different. Some people like hot dogs and some people don't, right? And some people have more money than others, and maybe they're more willing to spend money on certain things. Okay, so you see, so there's no contradiction. So once you have that idea, then we can solve the problem of why do we ever trade something? Why would anyone ever give me an object for a $10 bill? And it either makes sense to do that, or it's not the case that one person's getting ripped off. It's because our valuations are subjective. That if you're selling me whatever it is, a CD for $10, you, the person giving up the CD, you value my $10 bill more than the CD, and I'm the person who's buying it, I value the CD more than the $10. And there's nothing contradictory about that. Whereas if we're talking about something objective, like it wouldn't make sense to say, I traded something for something you gave me, and we both walked away with the heavier object, right? That's impossible. No, one object is objectively heavier than the other, or they're the same. We can't both walk away with the heavier object. But yet, if valuation is subjective, we can trade things, and we both walk away thinking, I came out ahead on that deal. I gave up something less valuable and got something more valuable, and there's no contradiction there. We can both agree with that statement, and that's the essence of voluntary trade and how it improves everyone's standard of living. Okay, thanks a lot.